Welcome. Thanks for joining me, Aaron Sanders, on my talk today. And I would also like to thank AgileByExample for inviting me to speak to you about dual-track development with Scrum. Today's talk will be broken into 4 main sections. It's very Scrum. Using the Scrum framework for discovery and development, I'll invite you to draw along with me the essential Scrum framework and some discovery practices that can help us out with it. There can be issues. That's the second section. Things to look out for as you attempt this work. What's cool about it? Things that I've seen and observed from different teams and organizations that are really starting to understand and work well with the Scrum framework. Let's begin is the final section, where you can start and how to get better at it. Are you ready to draw the very Scrum framework along with me? Grab your favorite drawing device. I'm going to get my pens and paper back here. Get ready to draw underneath my document camera. Are you ready? Let's do this. We start with circle. The sprint. A circle on top of that, the stand up, put a line underneath that, and some arrows. We have our inputs and outputs to that. Sprint backlog and the product increment. The product backlog, product owner, has the vision and is reflecting this on this list. Something conceptual to get going with. So the dev team will get together with the product owner and do some refinement on those big items, make them smaller, better defined, top of that product backlog, which should make planning go a little better, where we take things off the top that populate that list. End of it, we have our review of this product increment and then a retro on the sprint itself. There's feedback from the product increment that tends to have an impact on the product backlog. And the product backlog has influence over the product increment that we're doing. And this is all the track delivery, Scrum Master, keep things on the rails. Here's my zoom out technique. We'll loop with an arrow, triangle in front, where at the end, little stick figure. I've got my product owner, product backlog, product increment, and we'll leave away delivery, pinch, expand, pinch in. That's paper prototyping. Oh, there's tons of real estate. Either stay here if you need it, and then go back to this one and start to talk about discovery. In discovery, we're trying to get to the answer to 3 questions. What do people need? Not necessarily what they want. Try to understand what's buried underneath that ask. What really do they need? And that really has value. So that's first part of discovery, is looking at and answering what is valuable. However, we also need to make sure, do they part the experience? If this product idea is usable as well. Hopefully we have on our development team UX. Now we're asking them to do their job here on the Scrum team, but also work side by side with the product owner to make sure what people need, they can actually use. I see this a lot in organizations. A BA getting together with a designer to ideate through and think through screens and all of that. Add on feasibility and have somebody there along for the ride that can answer the question, can we build it? This is a developer that's on this team. Look for the kind of developer that submits ideas to the hackathon to see if this idea that we're finding is valuable and usable, is it really feasible for us to build? Looking at people that can deal with ambiguity, but have enough experience to lead this team in getting the answers to these questions. Remember, these folks are actually a part of the Scrum team. Really, they're meant to help this team in discovery. Be careful of them going off and doing it on their own, or these are the only people that interact with stakeholders. That's not what this is meant to do. As we're trying to answer these questions, there's some ideas, problems worth solving, and experiments, solutions, trying to create a very dynamic opportunity backlog. We can model it out. This is an opportunity canvas. What problem are we solving? Who is it for? What do they do today? Leap of faith assumptions. What are we guessing at? And if we guess wrong, we fail. And I find those leap of faith assumptions, especially where we're taking a swag at things, where we're just guessing, as we're building up this opportunity and doing especially a user research, 2 things start to emerge out in artifacts, the persona.
they have different needs and different ways that they access that value. We can start to lay that out, right, as a journey map or a story map, higher level activities and the tasks underneath them. As we're going through all of these things, we're getting pretty fine-grained and making sure we understand the problem. Then everybody has an idea how to solve that problem. Before we jump straight to the solution, take some time and run a design studio. We can create different solutions to the problem. We can create right fidelity prototype. And again, there's this feedback loop from prototypes, goes back into kinds of opportunities that we're looking at, and the kinds of opportunities we look at rolls around into prototypes and product increments that we're building. All of this stuff out here would be discovery. And as we learn, we build. And as we build, we learn more. It's not that we do one and then the other. These are two tracks that are constantly making contact. And I try to illustrate this to show that discovery wraps delivery. Because sometimes you deliver a product increment into production, then you learn. Monitoring what's going on with production. These two tracks are meant to be always making contact. Usually in a product's development, we start off iterating really, really fast on learning, and then we slow down as we deliver, and then we learn some more, deliver, learn, and usually finish really strong on that delivery track. Maybe that's a sprint, there's another one, so on. Each sprint has a little bit of a different mix of discovery and delivery. And if you're doing any of the scaling approaches, then we could start to think through the next 3 to 5 sprints. What don't we know, where we need to do a lot of learning? And then as we understand the right shape of the product, we really get in the trenches and pour that value in. And then what's the signal from the market to actually get that stuff to them? So we can think about beginning, mid, and end games to release for things at scale. This is my entire picture of dual track Scrum. Some people look at this and they say, this isn't Scrum. Look at all this other stuff on here. The essential Scrum framework is in the middle of it. I was looking at this. It's delivery, discovery. So I'm thinking about calling this very Scrum. I find product owners spend the majority of their time making sure everything is ready and prioritized. Pretty much your job inside a sprint is to accept items if they hit the value. Everything to make Scrum work is where I find is a lot of the product owner job.
Are you ready to try this? Well, there can be some issues. First category is what I would like to call tech doom. Forget tech debt. This is a place so scary and risky you should avoid it at all costs. Is your software actually soft and deployable? If not, maybe fix that first. Let me give you an example. I was working with a team. They were in sprint planning, tasking things out, giving a lot of the tasks very short duration because they kept saying, well, as long as the file is open. After a while, I was really curious what this meant. And they told me that for all stories, they leave the file open and keep working in it until it's time for unit testing. Not sure I understood that. I asked what unit test was. And that's when a developer will call somebody else from the team over, have them review the code so they can save the file, close it, and get it back into source control. We kept working through sprint planning, but I thought this team might not like Scrum so much if their code is so difficult to deploy. It's difficult where, not software. We should change that first, or they're really not going to like Scrum. Another place that I worked, a newly minted mobile app team was given greenfield to create the right mobile app for their customers. Sounds great. And they wanted to make sure to use all of the contemporary technology available for them, including continuous integration and deployment. Installing the unit test framework and getting going was slowing down things to the point where the business decided this team needed to stop unit testing. And as a matter of fact, the business asked the team to rip out the unit test framework because they weren't going to pay for that anymore. And I went into a director's office and asked them if they were willing to lock all of the doors and set the micro kitchens on fire. I felt like they had removed that amount of safety for this team to be able to build product with the integrity in. That whole safety net was taken away from them. Ever come across mandatory madness at work? Product owner for a team that was discovering what their users needed told me that getting that stuff into production was a whole other matter. They had a whole launch schedule. Getting something into production, getting it launched, required getting sign-offs or check-offs from many different departments at this company. Wandering around getting everybody to approve launching value into production took maybe twice as long as building it. It would take maybe 3 or 4 weeks to get things into production and check the box from finance, legal, security, and all of the departments. This product owner told me it was about half of her day job. At a financial organization concerned with security, they split their network for guests and for workers. As a guest, I had to log in every hour. This was their security measure to invalidate credentials every single hour. And they would not allow on their work network anything except for PCs. All of the designers were working on Macs. Those Macs were not allowed on the work network. They had to be on the guest network, and their work was interrupted every hour to sign back into the network. And watching designers try to get their work to development sometimes took most of a day. The workarounds for this particular security issue in getting something onto the approved network. Finally, there is a phenomenon of corporate cultural appropriation that is embracing mindset without maybe understanding exactly what it's about. One director was talking about bringing together a team and assembling that team as part-time work, and for a couple of days, they would sprint through that issue. Working with a team that was fast iterating and learning what their users needed was showing their internal stakeholders a version of it that was nowhere near ready for prime time. They had been optimized at that point for the speed of learning, not for the speed of integrity of things in production. Showing that at a sprint review to these internal stakeholders, they insisted it go into production. About a week later, driving into this office, I heard on the national radio, this site was down, costing the organization over $1 million a minute. And finally, one organization not knowing what a good Scrum Master really is and not understanding how to hire for it, decided to call all of their project managers Scrum Masters, without them really knowing the essential Scrum framework and certainly not knowing a lot about these discovery practices. I wandered around that organization, especially at the executive level, wondering out loud, if you called a rock a fish, would it swim? Okay, enough about the issues. Let's talk about what's cool about it. I was working with the team and they were really fast prototyping and trying to figure out in a hardware software product, what is the right industrial form factor for this product. And to figure that out, they had people work with bars of soap. It was a handheld device, and figuring out the right size to fit best in a hand, they had people test how bars of soap fit in their hand and would carve things out, try to make it fit better. And through luck, they found out from so many people holding those bars of soap that the back of the soap melted, and that's what they decided to do for the form factor, to put that curve in the back so that it fits in your hand. Blizzard's their logo has a nice little divot in it. Put your finger in it, and then the bottom is weighted so it feels really comfortable like this in the hand. the same company in building their wearable device, before producing a whole bunch of units, produced some at pretty high cost for usability testing, and then put people under a non-disclosure agreement, had them use the product, and then keep a journal of how they were using the product. Every week, the business would bring in about 4 or 5 of these users and have them walk through their journal and how they were using the product, trying to eliminate any last little kinks in the product before filling up supply chains with it. At another place where the organization was getting going, as they kicked off their Scrum teams to start to take on their own discovery, had contracted with an outside firm to do some user research. As the teams got better at their own user research and talking to at least 5 users every Friday, the organization started to talk about getting rid of the contract with that external organization. Yet there was wired into the contract a certain duration to it. Working together with that organization, instead of outsourcing all of that user research and a big part of discovery, they would go along for the ride with the teams into the field, watch how they were doing things, watch how they were doing usability testing, and help to develop and upskill these teams in the area of discovery on their own product. At this company, during that transition to Scrum teams taking on their own discovery, sales had sold a very big deal across the entire organization. It was a business-to-business deal. The teams were talking to different businesses, business people, and they were answering the questions more in lines of, how would this help me as a consumer? The teams were able to pivot around away from a business type of solution into a consumer solution. Everybody was really happy, including sales, who had originally sold the business deal, because it was returning on the investment. It was proving to be more valuable than what was sold. Saving the best for last. This is a startup company out of Chicago that works with different large corporate offices and also with service personnel to come in and do maintenance, like on heating and air conditioning units. The organization's main differentiator is getting out of reactive maintenance. The air conditioner unit goes down, have to go do something, get everybody cool again, and instead into preventative maintenance, where the machine keeps running all the time, never goes out, nobody's ever hot in the middle of summer. To make this work required an HVAC engineer, while in reactive maintenance, collect metadata on a unit. Can you imagine you're on the roof of a very hot office building fixing an air conditioning unit, and you're supposed to pull out your phone and start to tap in data for some other system that you're vaguely aware of? The product owner, thinking from the service engineer's perspective, instead worked with product development to create in the application a place to upload photos, or if you like, if you have the app open, to take a photo in app. However, that wasn't even necessary. And to take a photo of the badge on the unit and then to send that to the brokerage whenever it was more pleasant, instead of on the hot building, oh, I'm so hot, in the car or back at the office when they have the phone out, they're doing all of their after action reports and to send out the photos. And then the brokerage, instead of using AI and machine learning to look through the badges and figure out what was going on, because there's not enough data there, the metadata needed, the product owner also hired a group out of the Philippines, some manual data entry personnel, to look at the badge and get the right metadata. So train those people to look at it and put in the metadata. And then from there, that allowed the system to take over, look at patterns, and come up with the right way to get into preventative maintenance. I feel like this is such a great example of a minimum viable product test. As an organization, we get to decide on what the minimum test is. Our users decide on the viable product. Turns out that worked, and people are using it, and they were able to find the patterns in the data and start to move from reactive into preventative maintenance. Are you still here? Ready to try it? Great! Then here's some tips on where to begin. First, consider just getting scrappy. If it's you, your team, a few people, instead of looking for the organizational buy-in, what can you take of these practices and get going with? A company in the healthcare industry building a portable device, we're told there was no way that they could talk to clinical specialists and other medical personnel. These people are busy, have a job to do, and don't want to talk to a developer. They decided to make that happen anyway. Went and watched how people use their product, mapped that out, and figured out ways to improve it. It was really cool to see. And after they had gained enough evidence and were showing their internal stakeholders higher value and better progression in the product, when stakeholders asked, how did you do that? They had enough evidence to say, well, we went and talked to people. You told us not to. We found it valuable. And from that moment on, there was a lot more tolerance and a lot more ability for many of the product development teams to talk to their own users and customers. And think about how to promote job security as opposed to role security and allow lateral movement within the organization. A global company thinking that they didn't have enough staff in Bangalore to create fully staffed Scrum product development teams was very concerned. And I went to Bangalore, and one of the lead engineers, when a request would come in from headquarters, she would say, well, that's nonsense. We're not about to do that. That has absolutely no value to the user. And I thought, aha, there is a product owner in Bangalore. They don't even need to hire one. And going back to Chicago, I told them there is an engineering lead very passionate about the product. She is feeling the pride of ownership, so much so she's willing to say no to work that she thinks is not valuable in the product for the users and the customers. I also find it very useful in beginning to bring together whole teams or a collection of teams and try out product discovery in a workshop with at least one expert. And make sure it's the whole product development team, everybody, the folks that will wind up as Scrum Masters should all go together into the workshop. And that workshop, if possible, should use real work product. Come in with a problem to solve. Come in understanding some opportunities, and then go through as much of the discovery practices as is reasonable in a week and see if you can iterate to awesome and have everybody understand what it truly takes to deliver high value, high quality product to our users and customers. It would help me to illustrate the next few examples, so let's go over there and do that next. One question to think about when starting and to get past component-based teams and technology teams and feature-based teams, product-based teams, is this question. Where are the seams in the product? If we took a look at a simple software architecture stack, you have a front-end UI, middleware, and a back-end database. Maybe there's a seam somewhere that runs end-to-end through that product, pull apart by those seams and have one team over here working on something end to end, and then have another team over here who is also working things end to end. Let's give this team one person too. To get going, think about landing one team and bring together enough people to create a cross-functional team and let them know as they're getting going that they will intentionally be split apart to expand further in the organization. One team piloting, making sure that the software is soft and changeable, and then adding on the right product owner, starting discovery as they get going with all of that stuff, learning these practices, then expand by splitting, seeding new teams. Blue team, green team, purple team, working for the same organization and able to spin up a little faster than the first team because they're being seeded by somebody who started with this and is starting to learn the right kinds of practices and methods that work in this organization. And almost no matter how these teams are divided, if you find the seams in the product and they're mostly self-capable, there can be some coordination necessary between these teams. And that can start into a scaling approach. What do we need to do to coordinate across these teams? This is a good way to get the executives involved too. We have our 3 teams, and they will run into difficulties as they are attempting Scrum and attempting to do their own research, learning, and discovery. We can then create an executive action team. This is from Scrum at Scale, nice little acronym. And as these teams run into problems they can't solve for themselves, perhaps we could work with executives to catch those impediments, stack them up on a list, and then every so often, maybe every month on a regular cadence, we could pull some off and plan how we might solve those problems and work through it, checking in every day on that. Perhaps there is a coach along for the ride watching all of this, and at the end of it, they review how the organization and these teams have something to help them out, some new capability, cleared impediment, something to help them. Then eventually this executive action team that is now working with the Scrum framework might ask, hey, we're using this to solve everybody else's problem in the organization and improve them. What if we used it to help ourselves out? One organization I worked with, they'd figured out the seams in their product. There were 4 product areas, mostly self-contained. There were teams for each area, and then there was on these teams were the parallel tracks of discovery and delivery happening all the time. Then the executive action team became whole product team, and their product backlog, how they were thinking about value, would allow these teams to pull things from that unified product backlog into their own product area and get things done. And then what evolved around that was a coordination across all of this with things like big room planning to think through the next series of sprints. And so you start to see the evolution of really a bigger framework around all of this, with planning to start off with across these teams, the review and retro at the end of it, and then a meta stand-up on top of that. And that meeting, meta stand-up, would happen about twice a week to make sure that any dependencies were cleared and preempted, impediments, and that we could continue to progress together as an organization and series of teams. Thanks again for attending my talk. I hope you find it useful to discover the right product to build and deliver the product right. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, Aaron, thanks for your presentation. I really enjoy or appreciate your hints how to talk about unit test and with people from business. I think it's essential to make them understand how important it is. But I also have some questions to you. I really like your proposal to expand a little bit Scrum framework. Could you elaborate a bit about some techniques? I would like to ask you, what's your favorite tool or technique and why?
My favorite technique is what I would call go to the source. One thing that is so handy about Scrum is it takes latency out of the system. And one way to get faster is to take out all of the steps between a development team and their customers and users. I think that is maybe one of the most handiest tools. And even in the video, I said, sometimes if needed, get scrappy. Find ways to get to your users and customers and talk to them. Maybe when you first do it, you get it wrong. And if you do it frequently, like 5 users every Friday, task it out, put it in your sprint plan, make a commitment on your product development team to find out ways to clear out the guesses and assumptions you're making by talking to the people affected by your product.
Okay. On the other hand, what tool or tools which are quite popular right now you think it's dangerous and you won't recommend it?
Well, a saying is, a fool with a tool is still a fool. And when we are looking at how humans behave, what tool to avoid? It's such a difficult question to answer because you have to be better than your tools. And even a bad tool. There's a video somewhere on the web of Kelly Slater. He's a famous old school surfer, actually surfing in the ocean. And he's surfing a dining room table. So be better than your tools.
Okay, thanks. You mentioned about discovery and delivery phases, which in fact it's kind of loop. What we should involve in the product discovery phase and also in delivery phase. Let's call them how to define MVP. Minimum valuable participants should attend to such workshop, mainly in discovery phase.
Okay, be careful of the phase. And I talk about dual track development as discovery and delivery as two side-by-side tracks. And they are always making contact. The product development team might move into more of a discovery track, might lean harder on that track when there is significantly more learning to do, and might lean harder on the delivery track when it's time to really get in the trenches and build the product. However, there is always a back and forth of each. So I want to be careful of calling them phases. Who is involved? I would say that I always ask back when we ask who should be available or involved for these things, who needs to understand and experience these things. Collaboration, working together, is going through an experience together in order to get that tacit knowledge to really understand. And again, having product developers understanding customers, learning, building, assessing, looking for insights, adjusting strategies, changing the plan, reworking designs, refactoring the code base. It should be a collective team that collaborates, and after a while it gets too big. Another saying, more than 8 can't collaborate, and that's where collaborative strategies really help, and practices, and there are some tools in there, I would say. Having a skilled facilitator to help people continue to progress together and not allow hidden agenda and conflict and interpersonal issues get in the way of working together. Figuring out how to work together is we need to do that first. So the answer is the people that need to understand and experience, and that could be a lot of people. I've run product development workshops where we really go intensive on discovery for, say, a week, and over 100 people. People ask me how many people can be in your workshop. My answer is, what size room can you get? And then we'll figure out ways to break the larger group up into homogeneous and heterogeneous groups, and keep even changing of groups. Look for design constraints for how groups are organized, and for that matter, team. Some of that self-assembly instructions for teams. You can use that for these workshops to really change things up, go through a whole bunch of activities, and hopefully have something of strength that isn't so difficult to go through as a group that you never want to do it again, because that's not iterating. How do we keep it as a lightweight, adaptable redo that we're willing to reflect and learn and improve on that as well?
Okay, thanks. Based on your experience, do you see any different in applying this approach you mentioned a while ago between a small company and a huge corporate? What we should focus on?
Oh yeah, in larger enterprises, there is a need to focus more on internal stakeholders. Smaller organizations have less internal, and for that matter, less external stakeholders. And recognizing these are people too, they have needs which go beyond what they're asking for. And so figuring out what those needs are from sponsor, and listening to our internal stakeholders and enterprises, there's more of them than there are in lighter weight startups. That's a big difference.
Okay. Let me come back for a while to the huge corporate as example. How to talk about it with high-level management? From my experience, usually people focus on team level, but to achieve something, you need to talk with management. Could you give us any piece of advice how to convince them to that approach?
Sure. It's difficult to really convince anybody, and success, right? It's like the convincing and changing and winning hearts and minds is difficult. And I find the easiest way is to, well, there's actually a couple of things here. Model behavior. Is there a place in the organization to begin and allow it to organically emerge? You really cannot command and control into self-organization. And trying to convince and tell and sell other people is difficult. If we could collaborate and co-create, it becomes incredibly more powerful. And Jeff Sutherland says something along the lines of, you're agile in name only if you are using Scrum at the team level, and team success alone can gain you increases in productivity and value delivery. However, an all-in approach will be a lot better, figuring out ways to play the same game. And in my talk, the executive action team, their scope growing from using Scrum to help with organizational changes for the teams to embracing Scrum at the whole product level, where they see a cross-cutting view across all features and stakeholders, internal, external, and going to reviews, and in reviews showing what they have done over their last sprint. Yeah, leadership was convinced. I mean, they're passing notes back and forth to each other in review. They were using a Google document for that, so they had a way to kind of slide the note under the table, while the presenter was going, and follow up and come back around to different teams as needed. The head of customer experience says, "Yeah, I'll go follow up with Team Pink," and come back and let you know how that goes. And it was interesting from my perspective as a coach in that organization, and mentoring that executive team's coach, and watching them really embrace that. How again, if you could have a full product workshop, the company in Chicago did from the chief product officer down to the last hired individual contributor. All of those people were together in this very intensive workshop to really, and allow iterating in it, right? To go back through practices, those persona sketches and matching those up with a story map. That was really something for our team. We want to go back and do more of that. So in a week, having time to go back and iterate and improve over the work product, and watching a whole side of it. I mean, it wasn't like just the technology side or just the business side. It was top down, all of it. It becomes important, the recruiting from the outside in, make sure that it's a top-down, bottom-up approach, but also support in the middle, and some sort of middle out and outside in, to make sure that people understand that this is more than just for the teams.
Okay, thanks for your answers. In a while, we can get the link on the room chat to feedback the presentation. Thanks again, Aaron. I hope you will be available for our participants to grab you and talk a little bit, to dig into the topic you mentioned. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity.